most organizations fail to recognize when a salesperson is competent, and they waste massive effort trying to squeeze, blood out of a stone by focusing on improving win rates rather than just focusing on increasing volume.
Right. Oh yeah, totally. And when do or where do leaders? Hi, welcome back to the Revenue Science Podcast. This is Rich Smith, your host. Today we have a guest who is someone who has fundamentally changed how leaders think about sales. Justin Roff-Marsh is the founder of Ballistix and the author of The Machine, a book that takes a radically different approach to the design of the sales function. Instead of treating sales as an art form dependent on charisma, heroics, or star performers, Justin argues that sales should be designed and engineered like a system, optimized for throughput, flow, and leverage. His work has resonated deeply with CEOs and founders who are frustrated by unpredictable revenue, bloated sales teams, and the feeling that growth gets harder instead of easier as companies scale. Justin's perspective reframes sales from a talent problem into a design problem, one that exposes hidden constraints, misaligned incentives, and broken assumptions that quietly cap revenue growth. In this conversation, we explore what it really means to build a sales machine, why traditional sales wisdom often fails at scale, and what CEOs must unlearn if they want predictable, capital-efficient growth. Hey, Justin, welcome to the Revenue Science Podcast.
Rick, it's good to be here.
Great to have you. I thought maybe we could start with just a brief introduction, tell our audience about yourself, what you do, and just kind of bring them up to date on your background.
Well, I guess most folks know me because I wrote a book called The Machine. It came out, 6 or 7 years ago, and it's been pretty popular. I started Ballistix 30 years ago in Australia, where I'm from originally. We got quite a few clients in the States, including GE Energy, actually, at one point, and that convinced me to move over here and become a citizen. So I'm an American now. Yeah.
Great.
Thank you. And we built, but Ballistix was based around a radical idea that the sales function should be designed and managed like a machine, hence the book, or probably more informatively, designed and managed like you would manage production in a production environment.
Mm-hmm. So if I can just ask you a question about that, when was the moment that you realized that sales really wasn't a talent problem, it was a systems design problem?
So I came from the insurance industry, and when I left that industry, I'd progressed from being a salesperson to a team leader to a branch manager, and I ran a branch with 100 salespeople. And there was big margin in what we were selling, but we churned salespeople. We turned over our entire sales force 4 or 5 times a year. But the economics kind of worked. And the reason I left is because one of the owners of that company bought a startup and installed me as a shareholder and a CEO of the startup. And we were selling a membership program. This is long before the internet and membership programs were even a thing. But it was based around a book on budgeting, a book and sort of a guide, like a workbook. And I realized early on we needed to turn it into a membership program for a bunch of reasons. And we had a commission sales team, and we were just trying to, over time, increase the performance of the team. And they all complained, as salespeople tended to, that the primary problem was a shortage of leads. And we built in this company, it was called Hudson back then, a massive lead generation machine. We started running events, and then we went from little events to big events to huge events. And in Hudson's biggest year, when I was around it anyway, we put 45,000 people through public events. And as a consequence, we generated a shit ton of sales opportunities or leads for the sales team. And of course, we're watching the relationship between the volume of leads we're generating and the volume of sales that the salespeople were generating. And we saw some initial uplift, but it leveled off quite quickly. And what we realized was happening is that salespeople increased their activity in response to the increase in lead flow until they were comfortable with what they were earning and the level of effort they were expending. And generating additional leads over and above that didn't have any impact on their productivity. And that made it pretty obvious that it was a system design problem, not a, and we fixed that by taking away their autonomy, putting them in offices like doctors with patients queued up outside, like patients in a way prospects queued up outside like patients in a waiting room. And we force fed salespeople, not prospects, but we force fed them appointments, like how they make foie gras.
This is a super great conversation to have on the Revenue Science podcast, because a lot of what we talk about here is how to systematize growth and turn it from being smoke and mirrors, mumbo jumbo, magic tricks, to being something that's predictable and constant, and you can rely on it and promote it correctly. I feel like we're kind of two sides of the same coin, because you're sort of heavy on the sales side. I'm a bit heavier on the marketing side, but I think we've got the same philosophy about this. I'm curious, I've heard a million times, arguments between marketing and sales. Marketing says, well, sales is no good at closing the leads that we send them. Sales is saying marketing is no good at giving us enough leads or giving us quality leads. Do you hear that argument when you talk to sales teams, and what's your response?
Yes, I do. And my response is it shouldn't be a surprise to anyone that there's conflict between sales and marketing, because if you look at the design of the organization, you would have to assume that the designer designed a typical organization in such a way as to ensure that there would be conflict between sales and marketing. We could talk about it all day, but I'll give you one very specific example. There's a company called HubSpot that you might have heard of. Yeah, some clever person at HubSpot came up with an acronym, MQL, Marketing Qualified Leads. And at some later point, they came up with another acronym, Sales Qualified Leads, presumably because the criteria for deeming a lead to be qualified in the marketing department didn't cut the mustard in the sales department. So in response to that, they came up with two criteria. Now, I can't think of anything more idiotic. Imagine doing that in a production environment. You have a machine operator producing a part and handing it off to another operator to perform the next step in the processing of the part. And the first operator has a definition of fit for purpose. He produces the part until it meets that criteria, and then he hands it to the next operator in queue, in the line, and that operator says, sorry, I have a different definition of fit for purpose from yours.
Yeah, you're designing in bottlenecks and conflict into your process with that.
Yeah, so now marketing people, both sales and marketing, are very clever about defining why their functions exist, and they come up with such vacuous definitions that an observer could easily form the conclusion that the marketing department is the entire organization, and strangely, the sales department is also the entire organization. I mean, my approach to that is to say, well, we want to split marketing into two parts. There's marcoms, marketing communications, which are the folks responsible for plumbing. Building the brochures and the website and keeping the basic comms running, investor relations, etc. But then the other part of marketing is promotions. And promotions, the job of promotions is to keep the sales team busy. The job of promotions is to generate sales opportunities for the sales team at a faster rate than salespeople can consume them. So we take the responsibility for finding sales opportunities or leads away from salespeople in its entirety. We don't expect them to do it. We don't want them to try and do it. We don't want their fingers in it at all. And we say to the promotions department within marketing, you are responsible for generating sales opportunities at a faster rate than the sales team can consume them. And then we agree on a single definition of fit for purpose. So the promotions team has to create a sales opportunity that complies with this criteria. And if the opportunity complies with this criteria, they pass it to sales. Sales must accept it, and they cannot, if they want to keep their jobs, raise objections about qualification. They can argue for a change to the criteria, but they can't point to a specific opportunity and say this is not qualified.
I love that approach. And, I help clients with sales stages and sales and marketing stages all the time. And I don't ever use the term MQL or SQL because I don't like that. We talk about stages and entry and exit criteria to each stage. And if it doesn't meet the criteria, then it doesn't move on. And you can't update the stage. This is such a deep, like you're right. We could probably spend hours talking about marketing and sales alignment because I see this problem over and over and over again from company to company to company, both ones that I've worked for and ones that I work, with a consultant.
In most organizations, the definition of sales opportunity is such that the opportunity label or concept is meaningless. And the same applies to the notion of stages. In a typical organization, sales opportunities appear in the CRM when salespeople believe they should appear. There isn't a fixed criteria. And that's why in big ticket environments, you see an opportunity appear a week before it gets won.
Gerrymandering the denominator, right? They're only calling something an opportunity if they think they have an opportunity to close it or think it'll be easy for them to close.
Yeah. Our view is a sales opportunity is a salesperson's work packet, which means if a salesperson is expending energy on a thing, that thing is by definition a sales opportunity. So the minute a salesperson devotes a second of their finite capacity to performing some activity on a thing, that thing is a sales opportunity. And then where stages are concerned, we will only tie stages to behaviors, to prospect behaviors. If a prospect requests something or agrees to something or schedules something, so that they are objective and non-negotiable.
Yeah, and that's the same way that I approach it with designing entry and exit criteria. It's really that criteria is based on prospect behavior, not on internal salesperson behavior.
So the whole thing is such a mess in most organizations that most questions I get, how do we do such and such, or my typical answer is, why would you want to? Why would you want to try and extract value out of the opportunity module in the CRM? There's no value there to be extracted. If an opportunity appears in the CRM, if you know that to win an opportunity requires 100 days worth of work, and you have opportunities that appear on average with a very small range around that central tendency, and you have opportunities appearing in CRM and resolving to 5 days later, isn't it obvious there's a signal to noise problem?
Oh yeah, if that's your process where the salespeople are entering their own opportunities and they're doing it, kind of on the fly, ad hoc, as they believe they have something that they can close, then yes, I agree, it's worthless.
Populating the CRM with data generated by a random number generator would actually be more useful because at least we knew that the contents was random.
Yeah, where I've seen it work well in kind of more mature marketing and sales organizations is if you're properly defining the stages and you're building your criteria based on prospect behavior. The stages, particularly in the sales portion of the funnel, can be very useful for forward projections on revenue.
If the opportunity module captures every unit of a salesperson's effort, and and stages are defined in such a way that the definitions are objective and meaningful, then absolutely. What you can do is you can interrogate that data set and you can use it to run experiments.
And as a CEO or, a board, you get more comfort in the veracity of revenue projections.
Well, you should be. And fixing the CRM is one important step. But unfortunately, poor definitions within the CRM aren't the only source of noise in the system. In many organizations, we have salespeople who operate with a high degree of autonomy and who are paid commissions. So we have dysfunction amplified with a feedback loop, and we can't fix that whole mess just with better definitions in the CRM. I love math, and my tendency is always to say, let's pull some data and interrogate that data and see if we can tease some intelligence out of it. But in most cases, the best response to the math that you pull is to say, we're talking about a chaotic system here. The first thing we need to do is eliminate the chaos. And most organizations are not prepared to take the steps that's required to render their sales function non-chaotic.
You talk a lot in your book about sales throughput instead of persuasion. How should a CEO think about creating throughput in their sales organization?
Well, by throughput, I mean the rate at which we process opportunities. I mean, when I started in sales, I remember hearing a speaker say something like, some will, some won't, so what? And that's a hat tip to the idea that if you have a proposition that's really reasonably compelling and a salesperson who's reasonably competent, then the upside is increasing opportunity. The upside comes from increasing opportunity flow. Now, if you have a proposition that's not compelling or a salesperson that's not competent, you should probably fix those things first.
Yeah. Otherwise, you're just wasting resources. Yeah.
Most organizations fail to recognize when a salesperson is competent, and they waste massive effort trying to squeeze, blood out of a stone by focusing on improving win rates rather than just focusing on increasing volume.
Right. Right. Oh, yeah, totally. And when do, or where do leadership teams often misdiagnose a revenue constraint?
I don't think of it. I'm uncomfortable with the idea of revenue constraint. I would say always. I actually think the problem is bigger than that. I think that I think the problem is the word revenue. My view, and you may not like this, my view is that the sales department should not be responsible for revenue. Because if you think about it, in most organizations, not all, not project-based organizations, but in most organizations, revenue does not come directly from the efforts of salespeople. It comes from existing customers repurchasing. Now, what determines whether or not customers are going to repurchase? It turns out we can figure that out by looking at customers who stop purchasing and take their money to a competitor. And if you look at the reasons why customers defect and go to a competitor, it's always one of the same three reasons. They're unhappy with the operational performance of the organization, late deliveries, broken promises. They're unhappy with pricing, or they're unhappy with the product or the range of products. And if you think about those three criteria, those three criteria are, at least in a healthy organization, the responsibility of operations, not sales. So I view revenue as an operational responsibility. My view is that the sales department and marketing should be responsible for growth, not revenue. And growth comes from winning new sources of revenue. But it doesn't make sense to value a source of revenue by counting the revenue. You value the source of revenue by calculating the net present value of the annuity. So you win a new account. Your expectation that account's going to spend $5,000 a month with you for the next 4 years. You can calculate the net present value of that. That's $1 million asset, right? My view is the salesperson won a piece of business worth $1 million. We should not be interested in the revenue associated with that because that's operations responsibility. We should credit the sales department with generating $1 million asset for the organization.
Yeah, and it is amazing how many organizations do not use any kind of customer lifetime value or NPV calculation when they're looking at new sales. I would have a slightly different spin on what you just said. I'm interested in your reaction to it. So I kind of feel like revenue is everybody in the organization's job.
That means it's no one's job specifically.
Well, and the reason I say that is, the best organizations that I've been a part of and that I've worked with have great alignment within their leadership team. And within that leadership team, they recognize that marketing is only as successful as sales and operations and HR and finance, and everybody plays a role in bringing that product or service to the world. And if everyone is not doing, if any of those folks are not doing their job well or are aligned on different objectives or have different agendas or protecting their territory, whatever that may be, that blocks the potential of the organization to grow and to succeed over time.
That observation is true in every organization, but it is useful in only a very small organization. It has very limited utility in a large organization. Because so if we're talking about a restaurant, you can say, well, everyone's responsible for revenue, and it's easy for people to identify the connection, the cause and effect relationship between the stuff they do and revenue. But when organizations get really, really big, when an organization has 100 or 200 or 1,000 or 10,000 people in it, it's no longer possible. It's no longer realistic to expect people to make that connection. You're responsible for payroll. Your job solely is to give away money for a living. It's not immediately obvious to you, and it's hard for you to calibrate your behavior on an hour-to-hour basis with the contribution you're making or failing to make to the organization's revenue. So, as a consequence of that, what we have to do is provide individuals with metrics that are local, but that are subordinated to the goal of the organization. Now, the goal of the organization isn't revenue. The goal of the organization is to generate profit. So it's actually more complicated than that. So the local metrics that we designed for individuals, say someone working in the payroll department, has to subordinate to the rate at which the organization generates profit, which is a complex concept. Profit is a function of the amount of margin in each transactions, the rate at which transactions occur, and operating expense. And that's a very complex thing for people to wrangle. We can't expect somebody in the payroll department, if we say, all of us are here to make a contribution to the success of the organization, it's not a very useful statement in a big organization. Like, what's a poor payroll clerk supposed to do with that?
Well, I'll throw something slightly different at you and just get your reaction. So I started my career at an organization that was, you would classify it as a large organization, grew to be Fortune 1000. Some of the things that we did there, and I was lucky to start my career there because I learned so much about customer service and marketing and mindset, like little things. So imagine if the payroll department person that we were just talking about, when they received their paycheck, it said brought to you by the customer on it. Imagine if every door that they walked through said, think of yourself as a customer in the building. Imagine if there were a set of metrics that were displayed all over the company that show exactly how we're doing on certain things that lead to customer satisfaction. And every non-exempt employee in the organization got a quarterly bonus based upon that index. So like there are things that you can do to foster that kind of mentality within an organization. I've seen it work. So just curious, like, I've also worked in big organizations that were very dysfunctional, and there was nothing like that. And I think it shows in their ultimate results.
Well, we have to be careful. I've been into organizations that have those exhortations on posters hanging on walls all over the place. The dream work makes a teamwork. And in some cases, those organizations are dysfunctional. In some cases, they're very functional.
It comes down to authenticity. If it's authentic.
The psychology is important, of course. But I think if we're contemplating the design of the organization, if we have an operator somewhere in the midst of the organization, we need to give them a single metric, a single drumbeat to march to. Every salary person wants a simple drumbeat to march to. Now, that's not to say marching is a totality of their work, but you take away the drumbeat totally, or you provide them multiple drumbeats, out of sync with one another, and their job becomes unpleasant. So no drumbeat is unpleasant, because no drumbeat results in a cacophony of drumbeats. So my view is that every employee just wants a drumbeat to march to, a metric that they can hold themselves accountable to, and they need to be reasonably confident that if they can optimize that metric, they're doing the right thing by the organization. Now, there's other stuff that you can do on top of that, but the reason why people like sports is because there's no question over how you're doing. You're keeping score. Now, whatever sport you play, the sport is not simply keeping score. It's just that keeping score is a baseline requirement that provides an environment that enables you to have a whole bunch of fun. It isn't the fun, but it's a critical ingredient.
And it's a relatively simple environment that has a defined set of rules, which I think also plays a strong role in that. And why people like sports. It's easy to tell who won and lost. And many things in life don't give you that opportunity.
But the workplace should be designed so it's just as simple, because we can. And if you can, why wouldn't you? Like, why wouldn't you come up with maybe a simple metric and one or two sort of necessary conditions that can't be breached, if sports is so fun because we have a simple metric, why wouldn't we go to the trouble of designing an environment like that for our team members to operate within?
Yeah, that's exactly the right question. And I wholeheartedly agree. It comes down to also, like, you've got to be really intelligent about how you define that metric, because I think this is something that you've talked about a bit as well. Getting incentives in the wrong direction or missing how you create incentives to get the outcomes that you want can be a really big problem for many organizations.
Yeah, I'm not a fan of incentives. People don't work for incentives. People work because human beings are wired to be productive. There are evolutionary reasons why we pop out of the womb with a bias towards productivity, because if we didn't have that bias, our ancestors wouldn't have been there to give birth to us. So, I'm not a fan of incentives. I think we should pay people really well. And I think we should put them in a simple environment that designed carefully so that they can thrive in that environment, because people want to be productive and they want to have fun and they want to thrive. It's up to us to go to the trouble of designing an environment that facilitates that.
Part of that environment also is understanding that most incentives, as you said, and I agree, are non-monetary. They're based on self-actualization. They're based on, and which comes from feeling productive, right? They're based on recognition. We are hardwired from millennia to care what the people around us think of us. It used to be, when we lived in tribes thousands of years ago, that meant survival, right? So it's part of our DNA to want recognition.
Yeah, commissions and bonuses, in my view, are an attempt to do an end run around that. It's, well, we couldn't be bothered designing a productive workplace for you to operate in, we know that, consequently, we know that coming to work is soul destroying. We know that because we can observe that you seem to be suffering from a lack of motivation. So we're going to layer some financial incentives on top to try and fix the problem rather than addressing the root cause.
Yeah, great. So when do top performing reps actually hide a broken sales system?
It's every sales manager's dream that they can hire enough top performing reps that no one has to notice how dysfunctional the sales department actually is. But the problem is that every organization has one or two and is continuously hiring, trying to build a team of 10. And 10 years later, they still have one or two.
Right. So if hiring star talent, let's say, isn't the answer, yeah. So what should people be hiring for?
Consistency. I would much rather somebody who was intelligent, conscientious, a good communicator. I'd rather, because you can find 10 of those people, not a superstar. If you need a superstar to sell your product sucks. Fix your product such that it is inherently compelling, and then hire a team of intelligent, conscientious, capable communicators, and get rid of the high performers. They're a pain in the ass. Let your competitor take them.
Yeah, I often say the best marketing and sales efforts stem from a great product or service.
One of the problems with high performers is nobody bothers to figure out why these people are high performers, and often they're high performers because they're doing weird shit that they shouldn't be doing. I'll give you an example. I was in Sydney having a conversation with somebody from an enterprise technology company, and he invited his top salesperson, who was a superstar, $1 million plus a year, black Porsche turbo outside, and he was very enthusiastic about the fact that we were at the table. He's like, I'm down for anything that's going to increase, my lead flow. Typical salesperson, And he proceeded to pass judgment on what was wrong with the sales function. He said, what's wrong with our salespeople is they're not prepared to invest in what was called the pre-sales engineering team. We'd call it design engineering. And the CEO was kind of quizzical. He's like, what do you mean invest in the team? We pay the team. Why would the sales department need to invest in the team? And the salesperson's like, but it's all about discretionary effort. He goes on to tell the CEO, he said, when I have a request for a concept or a request for a proposal, I know that it's going to get actioned first by the pre-sales engineering team because I invest in that team. I send them away for weekends. I give them gifts. I invest a significant percentage of my hard-earned commission checks in looking after that team, and it works for me. He said, I've been trying to tell the other salespeople that they need to invest in their futures as well. And the CEO was aghast. And I think you could say, well, that's an anomaly, but I don't think it is. I think most organizations don't bother to study what exactly it is that the top performing salespeople are doing that causes them to be the top performing salespeople. And oftentimes they're doing things that are not in the best interest of the organization.
Let's go back to hiring and how you find the right kind of person for the sales team again. Let's say you've got a resume from someone who's applying for a sales job sitting in front of you.
Before I can answer that question, I have to ask you, in this hypothetical, what is the sales team actually doing? Is the sales team focused exclusively on winning new accounts and handing them off to operations for onboarding and account management? Or are we talking about a typical salesperson who's kind of a modern day Swiss Army knife, who's responsible for winning new business and managing accounts and solving customer problems and designing solutions and writing proposals?
Let's assume that we've got those problems fixed. and we're hiring somebody for the sales team that you would want to hire them for.
So how do we hire them?
What do you look for? Like, what are the qualifications, or what criteria, what tells can you find in a resume that would indicate that this is probably going to be a good performer?
We're looking for someone who's a good communicator, who is conscientious, but who also has an ego. They're someone who wants to win. They probably play sport. Um, um, and that's enough. Anyone who ticks those boxes is probably fit for purpose, and we should probably ensure that a small team of those people are successful by coming up with a truly compelling proposition and building an environment for them where they can spend 8 hours a day in a bullpen with a headset on, talking to prospective customers all day long, because that's where we're going to get a high throughput of sales opportunities from.
Yeah, it is surprising, and it's a trend that I've noticed as well too, that a lot of your best performing salespeople have had some kind of experience in competitive sports at a relatively high level, and it's an indication that to me that they understand, they want to win, and they understand that winning takes work, and winning is not about showing up to the game and playing.
The problem with being a salesperson is you have to endure a ton of pain. That's true of any profession. If you're a software developer, obviously you write the code 5 times. You rewrite the code 5 times before it eventually works. But with sales, there's a lot more emotional pain and a longer payoff. And it's getting worse over time. You if you're trying to sell into the enterprise, you might have to pick up the phone 20 times before someone even talks to you. Not to try and bring the conversation down, but I'm increasingly starting to be concerned that many organizations have sales teams that probably shouldn't have them, and would realize that they shouldn't have them if they bothered to stop and examine the economics of the sales team. If you bought into my argument that sales should solely be responsible for the pursuit of new business, then the question is, what is the level of effort that's required to win a new account? What does it cost to sustain the machine that generates that level of effort? And how does that compare with the lifetime value or the net present value of the account that you've just won? And I think that a lot of organizations, if they did the math, would end up concluding that it's cheaper to grow via acquisition than it is organically with a sales team, particularly in the absence of true product innovation.
Right. Of course, depending on industry and company circumstances, but I'd agree with that. How do the comp plans that most organizations put in place reinforce bad design without people realizing it?
2 big problems with salespeople's comp. The first is we underpay them. And the second is we compensate for the fact that we're underpaying them by giving them the permission to earn commission on top of their base pay. And the big problem with commission is if you pay not just a salesperson, but anyone in part or in full on a piece rate, then you have signaled to that person that they are operating autonomously. In other words, they get to beat the drum to which they march. And that person ceases to be an employee at that point in any meaningful sense and becomes an independent agent. So the question is, do you want your salespeople to be independent agents? And it's a simple question with a binary answer. The only possible answers are yes or no. There's no such thing as a semi-independent agent, because any employee is either marching to the drumbeat of the organization or they're marching to their own personal drumbeat. There's no such thing as marching to 2 drumbeats simultaneously.
Mm-hmm. And why do you think companies make that mistake over and over and over again?
Originally, when sales evolved, particularly here in the US, salespeople were autonomous agents. They were like manufacturers' reps. And I made a video, double-digit growth.
But they were pure agent, like they were not employees.
Yeah, they were. That's what we evolved from. So we've, and in many cases they had what's called a line card. They worked for multiple organizations, for multiple principals, as it's called. So that was the genesis of sales, and we that was the baseline from which the sales department evolved, if you like. And we've and industry or enterprise has tried to address the more unpleasant consequences of that by trying to clip their wings, take away some of their autonomy, and bring them inside. But very few organizations are prepared to recognize that the root cause of this problem is variable pay. We used to have this problem in production environments. Textiles, for example, people would get paid a piece rate based upon how many hems they sewed. But you don't find that in a modern production environment, because it turns out that the output of a plant is primarily a function of synchronization, not primarily a function of maximizing each individual's rate of work. If you attempt to maximize each individual's rate of work, you end up with chaos, exploding work in progress.
Yeah, and big quality problems.
Massive quality problems and no throughput. And exactly the same thing happens in sales. So we will not work with an organization at all if they are resolute about the fact that they're going to continue to pay their salespeople commission. Our advice to them is good luck. Our response to them is good luck. But and the reason we have that response is not just because the payment of commissions is destructive to the performance of the sales function, and it is, but because if a CEO thinks like that, it's a signal that they don't understand the game that we're playing.
Or they're not at least open-minded enough to consider it.
Yeah. If you were a production manager and you hired a new person into your team, and he or she suggested that we move all the employees to a piece rate because surely it will improve productivity, you wouldn't even bother to stop and explain to them why that doesn't make any sense. You'd recognize that this person has such a fundamental lack of understanding of how production works that it's not even worth talking to them anymore.
And I think, one thing that you're doing there very shrewdly for your own business is you're picking your customers based on the likelihood of the customer being able to succeed with what you're bringing them.
Yeah, I mean, realistically, they pick us because they read the machine, and the machine has a whole chapter talking about how commissions destroy productivity, and that's and that kind of splits people into two categories straight away. For some people, the idea is complete nonsense. For other people, it's academically interesting but practically unconscionable. And the third category are people who read it and go, "Fuck yeah, I can see the negative consequences of variable comp scattered all through our organization, the conflict between departments, the quality problems, all sorts of issues, poor behaviors on behalf of salespeople." Most organizations that approach us have already gotten rid of variable comp. They've already sat down with salespeople and negotiated proper salaries with them, which are higher, obviously, than, our advice is pay salespeople well and demand that they're productive. Don't pay them badly and then bribe them to be productive.
I agree. And, I also think that not necessarily in very large organizations, but in mid-sized companies or down, having everyone in the organization have some equity really also helps to enhance that feeling of, hey, we're all in the game together here.
I would agree with you, Rich, but only if they bought it, not if it was given to them. You should never ever give equity to employees, because it blurs the line between the natural division of responsibilities between a salary earner, a worker, and an investor. I mean, I'm a big fan of teaching people to think like investors, but we don't teach people to think like investors by giving them equity. We teach them to think like investors by giving them the opportunity to have skin in the game. And they don't have skin in the game if they didn't put their hand in their pocket and pay for it.
In a private company, it's not that you're trying to teach them to act as an investor. You're trying to give them ownership in the outcome.
Well, that's an investor, right?
Yes and no. It's
So there,
different.
there are
Yeah.
two financial transactions that occur in an organization. There's the exchange of effort for money, and there's the exchange of risk for money. There are two games that occur in parallel. The investor gets paid for risk, and the worker gets paid for effort. And it doesn't make sense for us to blur those two games together. It doesn't make sense to say, well, we're going to share the profits with you in exchange for the extra work that you did. No, what you get paid for work is salary. And if somebody works really, really hard, then we should give them a higher salary. And maybe we should give them the opportunity to hold back some of that salary, and invest in the organization's stock. But I strongly believe I'm not a proponent of profit sharing at all, because I think it actually does the opposite. It blurs the line between the worker and the investor. And you don't help a worker to aspire to be an investor by giving them equity or giving them the benefits of equity, profit share.
So what would you say to the CEO that is a CEO of a smaller company, startup, and they're asking people to come work with them and take a risk on the output of the company? They're not able to pay that person what they would get in the market.
There's two types of companies. There's a venture-backed technology startup, okay? And we can't compare a venture-backed technology startup with a small business, a jobbing shop, a fabrication shop. Yeah. In the case of a fabrication shop, a small business or a restaurant or something, you're allowed to have a lot of shareholders. You're allowed to have, I don't know how many it is, 1,000 or, so it should figure out a way to talk to your accountant and your lawyer, figure out a way to issue them stock. Now, the game is played differently with venture, um, and stock options, and so on. And employees understand that they're taking a lower salary in exchange for stock options. So they are actually investing. They are actually investing money in the company stock. And
Yeah, they're exchanging their effort for the future potential of a gain.
that example probably makes my point. And they're quick to cut bait if they start to get the feeling that their stock options are underwater and unlikely to ever be valuable. They will up and leave, which is a big problem. If the company doesn't continue to grow at 20% per month, your best engineers are all going to leave and go and try and climb into another company that's a rocket ship.
Let's change gears a little bit. Just talk about the companies that you work with. What's the most common failure pattern when companies try to implement your ideas? What are the landmines that they should be looking for?
Over the years, we have changed what it is that we do for organizations. I think when folks read The Machine and they reach out to me, I think they think, oh, Justin's going to come and do something funky for our sales department. Realistically, the work that we do is redesigning organizations' front of house. So our starting point is that the sales department should be designed to pursue new business, and the operations department should be designed to process revenue. And until you have that clear demarcation between those two groups, the growth group, which would include sales and marketing and new product development, and the operations group, which is the folks responsible for revenue, then it's very hard to get traction with any of our ideas. Now, practically, what that means is when we start work with an organization, we actually start work on the operations side of the front of house, not the growth side. Typically, we leave salespeople alone for the first 6 months or so. We focus on taking away from salespeople all of the non-sales activity that they're responsible for: the account management, the customer service, the solution design, proposal generation. We take all of that stuff, and onboarding of new accounts. We take all of that stuff and we build it into operations. Now, oftentimes, the operations group is reluctant to take responsibility for that, and oftentimes the operations group doesn't have the necessary talent to take responsibility for all of that stuff. So a lot of our work is initially, when we're working with an organization, is building out those new capabilities within the operations department. And we don't actually touch sales or marketing initially. Now, it's the work that we're doing in operations is not that difficult. It's low risk. Most executives agree that the stuff we're going to do in operations, it's kind of embarrassing that they hadn't done it themselves 5 years previously. So it's easy to get buy-in. It requires experience and knowledge of what we're going to build, but there's very little variation from organization to organization. It's blocking and tackling, low risk, big return. So I would say, prior to changing our focus, we had all sorts of problems. But if we can get to the point where there's nothing for the sales department to do other than hunt for new business, then the work that we want to do with sales and marketing becomes so much easier. For starters, we don't need anywhere near as big a sales team.
Yeah. Could you share an example or a story of, where doing the things you just said, simplifying the sales motion, upgrading the capabilities of the operation team led to outsized gains?
Yeah, I mean, we have a distribution client who during COVID, prior to COVID, embarked on a journey with us to initially make big changes to operations. They had 16 or 17 offices, each of which had customer service reps, all of whom answered to local general managers. We're not a fan of branch-based organizational architecture, so we were already in the midst of a transition to a central customer service team, one central inbox. Team members were still located all across the country, but they all answered to a single head of customer service. So we'd centralized the customer service team and designed the whole team around speed. Measured down to the second how long it takes to generate each quote, process each order, and resolve each customer issue. And that organization grew significantly during the COVID period, because it was just so much easier to transact, so much easier, so much faster to transact with them than it was competitors. And it also meant that when we turned our attention to sales, the salespeople only had one thing to talk to customers about, and that's buying new stuff.
It's amazing what removing friction from a process will do for it, right?
So the problem is inertia, right? In a big organization, it's not enough to have ideas that make sense. You need to know how to fix the plane while it's in flight, because nobody wants to land the plane and have revenue go to zero.
Yeah, I call it building the plane as you taxi down the runway.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Well, hey, this has been a great conversation. I'm going to throw a few lightning round questions at you. Just give me your first reaction. All right. So what would you say is the most overrated sales metric?
Win rate.
Win rate. What's the most underrated constraint in growth?
Innovation. Two things tend to go together. A poorly engineered sales function, a bunch of autonomous commissioned salespeople running around, and the complete absence of new product development. And I would say the second one is much more concerning than the first one. And the first one can disguise for a period of time the absence of the second one.
What's one belief about sales that you would erase from leadership teams overnight, if you could?
That salespeople should be responsible for revenue.
Good one. All right, last question. If you're talking to a CEO today and they ask you, well, what's one thing that I could do this quarter to improve my sales efficiency and remove the theater from it, what should it be?
Build a robust, centralized customer service team that contains, perhaps in conjunction with engineering in a technical environment, that contains all of the capacity and all of the capabilities required to ensure that there is zero requirement for salespeople to have any involvement in basic transactional stuff, order processing, quote generation, including solution design and issue resolution.
I love that answer. That's a great one. Okay, great, Justin. So where can people go to find out more about you, your work?
Well, go to Amazon and buy, I have 2 books, The Machine and a little mini book called Ode to Speed, which talks about really the application of theory of constraints to the design of the organization as a whole, particularly the front of house. It's arguing against cost accounting or specifically the use of cost accounting for making management decisions. So yeah, I would say Amazon.com, or if you want to find me directly, I'm on LinkedIn or the Ballistix. We have a website. I'm easy to find.
All right, great. Well, thanks so much, Justin. It's been a fantastic conversation. Really glad you got some from very pointed views, which I think are going to be a little bit of a wake-up call to a lot of our audience. So really, really appreciate your thoughts and having you on the show today. It's been great.
Thank you, Richard.